Black Hearts in Battersea by Joan Aiken, Chapter 1. On a fine warm evening in late summer, over 100 years ago, a boy might have been seen leading a donkey across Southwark Bridge in the city of London. The boy, who appeared to be about 15, was bright-eyed and black-haired, and looked as if he had spent most of his life out of doors. He carried a knapsack and wore rough, warm garments of frieze. Both boy and donkey seemed a little bewildered by the crowds round about them. The streets were thronged with people strolling in the sunshine after their day's work. Halfway across the bridge, the boy paused, took an extra turn of the donkey's halter round his wrist, and pulled out of his pouch a grubby and much-handled letter, which he proceeded to study. "Come and stay with me for as long as you like, my dear Simon," he read for the 20th time. "I have lately moved from Park Lane to lodgings that are less expensive, but sufficiently comfortable and commodious for us both. I have 2 rooms on the top floor of this house, which belongs to a Mr. and Mrs. Twite. The Twites are an unattractive family, but I see little enough of them. Moreover, the windows command a handsome view of the river and St. Paul's Cathedral. I have spoken of you to Dr. Furness, the principal of the Art Academy in Chelsea, where I sometimes study. He is willing to accept you as a pupil. Through my visits to this academy, I have made another most interesting acquaintance to whom I wish to introduce you. More of this when we meet. Yours, Gabriel Field, M.D. P.S. Kindly remember me to Sir Willoughby and Lady Green, Miss Bonny and Miss Sylvia Green, and all other friends in Yorkshire." The letter was addressed from Rose Alley, Southwark, London. The boy named Simon looked about him somewhat doubtfully, and, after a moment's hesitation, accosted an elderly and rather frail-looking man with sparse locks, who was walking slowly across the bridge. "I wonder, sir," he said politely, "if you can direct me to Rose Alley. I believe it is not far from here." The old man looked at him vaguely, stroking his beard with an unsteady hand. "Rose Alley now, Rose Alley. Dear me, the name is indeed familiar." His hand stopped stroking and his eyes roamed vacantly past Simon. "Is that your beast?" he asked absently, his gaze lighting on the donkey. "Ah, I remember when I were a lad in the forest of Epping. I had a donkey used to carry home bundles of firewood for a penny a load." His voice trailed off. "Rose Alley, sir," Simon said gently. "I am searching for the lodgings of Dr. Field." "Dr. Field, my boy?" "Yes, sir, Dr. Gabriel Field." "That name, too, seems familiar. Dear me, now, dear me. Was it Dr. Field who put the bread poultice on my knee?" He advanced his knee and stared at it, seeming mildly surprised to find that the bread poultice was no longer there, with Dr. Field's bill attached to it. Simon, watching him, had not noticed an extremely dirty urchin who had been hovering near them. This individual, a sharp-looking boy of 11 or 12, who seemed to be dressed in nothing but one very large pair of trousers. He had cut holes in the sides for the arms, now jostled against Simon, contriving at the same moment to tread on his toes, flip his nose, and snatch Dr. Field's letter out of his hand. He then ran off, singing in a loud, rude manner, "Simple Simon came to town riding on a moke. Donkey wouldn't go. Wasn't that a joke?" "Hey!" shouted Simon angrily. How did the boy know his name? "Give back that letter!" He started in pursuit, but the boy, thumbing his nose derisively, crumpled up the letter and tossed it over the rail into the water. Then he disappeared into the crowd. "Ah, dearie me," said the old man, sighing in a discouraged manner. "The young people grow rougher and ruder every day. Now, what was it you were saying, my boy? You wanted to the address of a Dr. Poultice? A strange name, very. So far as I know, there's no Dr. Poultice in these parts." "No, Dr. Field, Dr. Gabriel Field, in Rose Alley," said Simon, still vainly trying to catch a glimpse of the boy. "Dr. Alley? Never heard of him. Now, when I was a lad in the forest of Epping, there was a Dr. Marble." Simon saw that he would get no good out of the old man, so he thanked him politely and walked on across the bridge. "Did I hear you say you wanted Rose Alley?" said a voice in his ear. He turned, and with a relief saw a smallish, brisk-looking woman with pale blue eyes and pale sandy hair and a bonnet that was most ingeniously ornamented with vegetables. A small bunch of carrots decorated the brim, a couple of lettuce leaves curled up rakishly at one side, and a veritable diadem of radishes was twined tastefully round the back. "Yes, Dr. Field's lodgings in Rose Alley," said Simon, relieved to find someone who looked able to answer his question. For though the little woman's bonnet was eccentric, her mouth was decided and her eyes were very sharp. "Don't know any, Dr. Field, but I can tell you the best way to get to Rose Alley," she said, and reeled off a set of directions so complicated that Simon had much ado to get them into his head. He thanked her and hurried on, repeating, 2 miles down to Southwark Bridge, past the Elephant and Castle Inn, past Newington Butts, through Camberwell, then take a left turning and a right fork. But hey, he said to himself when he had gone half a mile, didn't Dr. Field say that from his window he had a view of the River Thames and of St. Paul's Cathedral? He turned round. St. Paul's Cathedral had been in view while he stood on Southwark Bridge, but now it was out of sight. That woman must have been wrong, Simon thought, beginning to retrace his steps. She must have been thinking of some other Rose Alley. I'll go back until I am once more within sight of St. Paul's and the river and ask somebody else. What a place this London is for confusion. He presently reached the bridge once again, and this time he was luckier in his advertiser. A studious-looking young man with a bag of books said he was going to Rose Alley himself, and led Simon off the bridge, around a couple of corners, and into a tiny cobbled lane, giving directly onto the river front. There were about half a dozen tall, narrow, shabby houses on either side, and at the far end a patch of thistly grass sloped down to the water. Simon had forgotten the number of the house where Dr. Field lodged, but when he asked which belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Twite, the young man pointed to the last house on the right, number 8, which stood with its back to the bridge and its side to the river. Simon tethered his donkey on some broken railings and knocked on the door, which was in need of a coat of paint. For a long time there was no reply. He knocked again, louder. At that, a window flew open and a child's head popped out. "There's nobody in but me," she snapped. "Whose donkey is that?" "Mine. Is this the house of Mr. and Mrs. Twite?" "Yes, it is, and I'm Miss Twite," the brat said with a haughty air. "What do you want?" "I'm looking for Dr. Field." "There's no Dr. Field here. Can your donkey gallop? What's its name?" "Caroline. Do you mean Dr. Field is out?" The child looked thoroughly unreliable, and Simon was not sure whether to believe her. "Can your donkey gallop?" she repeated. "If you'll come down and answer the door, I'll give you a ride on her," said Simon. She vanished like lightning and reappeared in the doorway. She was a shrewish-looking little creature of perhaps 8 or 9, with sharp eyes of a pale, washed-out blue, and no eyebrows or eyelashes to speak of. Her straw-colored hair was stringy and sticky with jam, and she wore a dirty satin dress 2 sizes too small for her. "Is Dr. Field out? Do you know when he'll be back?" Simon said again. She took no notice of his question, but walked up to the donkey and untied it. "Lift me on its back," she ordered. Simon good-naturedly did so, urged the reluctant Caroline to a trot, and led her to the end of Rose Alley and back. Miss Twite hung on the saddle with loud exclamations. "Mind out, not so far, you're shaking me. She's bumping. Make her slow down. Oh, your saddle's hard." When she arrived back at number 8, she cried, "Give me another ride." "Not till you tell me when Dr. Field will be back." "Don't know." "Well, where are your father and mother?" "They've gone to Vauxhall Gardens with Penny and Grandpa and Aunt Tinty, and they won't be back till midnight past." "Why aren't you with them?" "'Cause I threw Penny's hat on the fire," she said, bursting into giggles. "Ooh, how they did scold! Pa walloped me with a slipper, leastways he tried to, and Mum said I mightn't go out, and Penny pinched me, spiteful cat." "Who's minding you?" "I'm minding myself. Give me another ride." "Not just now. The donkey's tired. She and I have come all the way from Yorkshire this week. If you're good, you shall have another ride later, perhaps." Simon was learning cunning, but Miss Twite looked at him with a knowing, weary eye and said, "Gammon! I know you're later, perhaps." "Would you like to give the donkey some carrots?" Simon said, visited with inspiration. "Don't mind." He pulled a handful of carrots out of the pannier and broke them up. Miss Twite was delighted with the privilege of feeding Caroline, and almost shed her world-weary air. Seeing her absorbed, Simon quietly walked through the front door of the house, and up a steep and dirty flight of stairs, past several landings. At the top of the house, 2 doors faced one another. Simon remembered that Dr. Field had said there were 2 rooms. Doubtless both of these were his, but no reply came from either door when he tapped. It appeared that the child had been speaking the truth, and Dr. Field was indeed out. It surely could do no harm to wait for him here, however, Simon thought. By this time he was decidedly fatigued, and a kitten, which had been asleep in his knapsack, at this moment woke up and mewed to be released. Simon opened one of the doors and looked through into the room beyond. As soon as he saw the window, he recognized the view that Dr. Field had described, the river, the Southwark Bridge, and an expanse of mud gleaming pink in the sunset, below the tethered barges. Beyond towered the dome of St. Paul's, but strangely enough, the room, which had a faintly familiar smell, did not contain a single stick of furniture. Perhaps this room is for me, and I am to buy my own things, Simon thought, and recrossed the landing, remembering with a grin Dr. Field's previous lodgings in Park Lane, where painting equipment, easels, pallets, and bottles of turpentine jostled pills and medicine pails, where a skeleton lounged on the sofa. But the other room, too, was bare. It did contain a little furniture, a bed, table, and chair, and a worn strip of drugget on the floor, but there were no covers on the bed, and it was plain that this room, too, was unoccupied. Simon scratched his head. Could he have made a mistake? But no, Dr. Field had distinctly written, Mr. and Mrs. Twite, Rose Alley, Southwark, and here, sure enough, was the Twite house in Rose Alley. Here was the top room with the view of St. Paul's. The only thing lacking was Dr. Field himself. Perhaps he had not yet moved from his other lodgings, and yet Simon had received the letter with the new address a full 2 months ago, and had then written to Rose Alley saying when he proposed to arrive. Could something have changed or delayed the doctor's plans? Simon ran down the stairs again, resolved on trying to get a little more help from young Miss Twite. He arrived none too soon for poor Caroline. Having finished the carrots, Simon observed traces of carrots on the china